Great. Hi, everyone. This is Max. I'm in Berlin, Germany, convening today the first meeting of the European Time Zone Zoom meetup. We're going to do a close reading together of an Emily Dickinson poem, which is frequently referred to as "This is my letter to the world," based on the first line. I'm going to go ahead and read the poem, and then we'll start with our collaborative close reading. Here goes. This is my letter to the world. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me, the simple news that nature told with tender majesty. Her message is committed to hands I cannot see. For love of her, sweet countrymen judge tenderly of me. Great. So, where to begin? This is a characteristically complicated Emily Dickinson poem. I want to say. I guess we could go through and start maybe gathering some impressions of some of the words. I always find that what's convenient in Emily Dickinson is that she capitalizes the words that are supposed to be important for us. So here we have our first capitalized word is world. So this is my letter to the world. World. What is she saying here? What is the world? How are we meant to understand this capitalized world?
Mac, are you going to call on us, or are we to mute, or what would you like us to do?
That's a good question.
I have an idea, because a question. Did Emily Dickinson study some in German? Because in German, since the nouns are capitalized, maybe that drifted into her mindset.
That's true. The nouns are capitalized in German. And I think that nouns are also capitalized in older forms of English or older print forms of English.
Like Benjamin Franklin, for example.
Right, exactly, yeah. So I think that's a sort of old-fashioned thing that is, I don't really know enough about print culture to say whether by Emily Dickinson's time that would have been kind of anachronistic. But it doesn't seem too too strange. Although what is interesting is that only certain nouns are capitalized. For example, letter is not capitalized in this line. So, and as for your question about calling on people, I wasn't going to call on people. If you want to mute and then unmute, that might be okay for the sound. So far, we're okay. There isn't too much ambient noise. So, we'll just be mindful when we chime in, and I'll do my best to facilitate the discussion.
And as to the capitalization, the poem that you had us read for Ruth Wise, she did a revolution against capitalization. Everything she did,
right,
was in small caps. So
even her name is
her name, right?
Small caps. Yeah.
So that's just something else to think about with the capitalization.
That might be, so Stanley's making reference to the Ruth Weiss poem that I had, which is called simply Poem, right?
The animals have come down from the hills, Yeah, but that was all. She wrote everything in small letters.
That's what I would say to the Emily Dickinson poem about the capitalization, is that I think that world, I think this is kind of a juxtaposition between world and nature in this poem. To me, she kind of puts them opposite of each other, because to her, I think in this poem, at least how I read it, is that the world represents human society and nature is on the other side, kind of more this godly presence. And I think that this capitalization of world just emphasizes it, and kind of shows us that this is maybe not the whole world, but mostly human society.
That's so you're understanding world in this sense of worldly, or there's this older sense of worldly, meaning the world of human affairs or something. That's, I think it's, you find that maybe in the Bible. Maybe somebody who knows better about this can correct me. Right. Okay. Yeah. And I think you're right. Yeah. Because there is this opposition that's set up with nature, at least in this first
Nature
sentence.
world,
So Emily Dickinson is writing a poem to the world, the human world, something like civilization or society, maybe, that is being opposed to nature. Okay, good.
I would say the word is everything. It is her readership, the readers, my letter to my readers, to the world, having a biographical approach. Emily Dickinson lived withdrawn. She lived on her own with a family, but absent from the world. So this is the outside world, not her closet, not her room where she was writing. And of course, it is also the world in contrast to nature. Then towards the end, who judges her? Is that God? So something, another power comes in. So we have the speaker, we have the word, we have nature, and the judge, God.
So there's a lot of,
There's also countrymen, I would say. I don't know if we're only looking at capitalized things, but
countrymen.
we're not, no, we don't have to look at just capitalized things. It can be free. You're right. Yeah, there's countrymen as well. So there's this idea of the nation. And I think just to seize on what you said a second ago, Mark, about the world being her readers or her hypothetical readers, or let's say some kind of literary establishment. This is her letter to that world, you know, following Unia's laws of like the world of people, the world of affairs, that never wrote to her, right? So this is there's something that's kind of sad or forlorn or tragic, maybe at the beginning. I think that gets sort of changed around, but so she's writing this letter to people who have never written to her. The simple news that nature told with tender majesty. Okay, so that next couplet I think starts to get really complicated. If anybody wants to try to parse out what the simple news that nature told with tender majesty is supposed to mean here.
See, the idea of her message, a typical multiple preposition, a preposition pronoun, and her message, the message of the letter, but the message of the letter, which is given out to hands, will never receive it, that she'll never see. But also her message, her letter's message, seems a reflection of nature, of what nature told. She sides with nature because the world doesn't side with her.
Sure. And she's here to bring the simple news, and there's something about the news, the good news that's very that's very gospel-like, right? Like you're bringing the news that nature told. So she's writing, her letter is nature's news. She's siding with nature, as you said. And with tender majesty, this is modifying the news or the way that nature told the news, correct?
Exactly, that's what I think, yeah.
Your majesty.
Because when she says for love of her, the nature within the letter. So parallel to loving nature, you should judge tenderly of me, because tender comes with tender majesty, and judge tenderly of me. Tenderly is repeated.
Right at the end, yeah.
So she wants, I think, you judge my letter with its content of nature, let's say, and for love of her, nature, judge tenderly of me, Emily Dickinson.
Yes, I agree. I think that she to me, she's basically saying, just don't shoot the messenger. Like it's not my opinion. I'm just giving this message. To me, she basically translates what nature told her, maybe because she can see it or she can hear it, and she translates what she took in with her senses into words. And I think that's very interesting that she basically says that all her poems, maybe not all her poems, but a few of her poems are not what she thinks, but what nature gave to her, that she's just the messenger, that a poet is a messenger. I think that's a very interesting image.
Super. Right.
I guess sort of building on that, I would see the world that she's talking about as maybe something beyond, maybe not the world of people, but again, otherworldly sort of place. So she's getting these hints from nature, from this other world, like nature's sort of a go-between, like leaving these hints and clues. And so she's never actually gotten solid proof, I guess, of this world, and it's never written to her. But nature is committed to that world and its hands that she also cannot see. So she's saying, you know, I'm trying to write of this and pass on that news, which is maybe why I'm strange, or why I feel like I'm being judged because I'm getting this special message.
Yeah, I always have, I like to read, it's not I tend to read things at word value. I'm very far still from metaphors and what they mean afterwards. So I try first to see what its meaning and actually what the words say. And it comes to mind, and it could be completely wrong, but when she says the simple news that nature told with tender majesty, this is the world. It's the natural world. It's trees and grass and everything, very easily done. However you want to look, whoever made it, it got made. She calls it nature. Some people can call it God, but nature exists, and it was done, and nobody questions it. And it was, we don't know who made it, hands that I cannot see, but everybody has accepted it. It's there. Our world is here. And since we accept all of that nature, then somehow, please accept me, or when you think of me, quote unquote, judge me as easily as you go outside and, let's say, take for granted all the nature that we do take for granted. That's a thought I had, because I read the words, and that what I took out of them.
Good.
Oh, was somebody about to chime in? No.
Yeah, the last thing I thought of her letter going to Bartleby, from Melville's Bartleby. I prefer not to. He worked in the dead letter office. I wonder if her letter went to the dead letter office.
Bartleby, her contemporary.
Yeah.
Okay. No, this is I think there's an interesting opposition here that we've begun to tease out, and that the past few comments have sort of teased out a little bit further between the natural world and the world that she's invoking it here in that very first line. And I think you're right, Unia, to say that she's presenting herself as this kind of, as this messenger, like, don't blame me. I'm just doing the natural thing. Like, and the way that nature is invoked here almost suggests this, like, she can't help herself, right? This is something that she has to do, and it sets her apart a little bit, I think, as you were suggesting, Willow, that it sort of marks her in a way as being like a little bit different, a little bit apart. And there's this kind of like almost, the reading it now together, there's this almost like hippie flower child vibe to the beginning here, where she's like, hey, I'm just with nature. Like, don't blame me. I'm just telling you how
Yes.
great it all is out there in the world, um,
And she was 100 years before Woodstock.
Yeah.
more than, or yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, yeah. There is this kind of like almost like romantic, since she's 100 years before Woodstock, but she's contemporary with, or shortly after the British Romantic movement. So there is this kind of like this sublime, the nature is figured as sublime. There's this very open, receptive attitude towards nature and the natural world, especially in contrast with industrialization, with like the industrial cities that are sort of cropping up everywhere in the 19th century, or the rapid process of industrialization. So she's relaying the message of nature, and that message is committed to hands I cannot see. And I think, Jackie, you started to say how that this is a kind of creation story, that there's something about nature that we just sort of accept because it's already there, it pre-exists us, and it seems to be made by invisible hands, right? Some sort of deity or some kind of universal power. I think that Emily Dickinson, her poems can be quite religious sometimes, and I think she's very much invoking a Christian and specifically Protestant God whenever she's talking about the divine. But she's usually pretty good about like not being too on the nose about it. But I think these invisible hands are definitely the hands of a Christian.
Her message,
God.
it's a woman, her message is committed.
Nature's message.
Yeah, so Mother Nature.
Natura.
Right. Nature is feminized, which is actually very interesting. Maybe something for us to think. I mean, nature has long been feminized. It's not like she's doing, Mother Nature is a figure, right? It's not like Emily Dickinson is doing something completely crazy radical. But I think there is something about the, her message here kind of appearing in the middle of the poem, which is very interesting. I don't know if anybody wants to like gloss this couplet any further. Her message is committed to hands I cannot see.
I mean, you have to look at it in the context of what is she doing. She's writing a letter, and she's telling us what she wants to tell about, as simple news that nature told her with tender majesty. And then she refers to nature as her, as you just said, and her message is committed to hands I cannot see. But she writes it to her sweet countrymen, and I like to read it too, that if we need to care for nature, we have to do something with our own hands. So we could read it maybe even that she means these could be the hands of the countrymen, that we have to do something, because otherwise it doesn't really make sense to me that she writes this letter, because she does have a message. The message is conveyed, but it's her own message. Otherwise she wouldn't write the poem. So she needs to do something. And she kind of brings it together. Is what is important to her is the love for her. And that's something that if this is how one could read it, it's just one suggestion, that we have to do something with our heart if we want to give back to nature, would like to serve her. So I would go a little bit beyond of reading it just as a flower girl poem. There's more to it, because there's always more. And also when you look at the word world, this is as big as it can get, Sweet countrymen, that's the people she's dealing with on a daily basis, and who might read that letter, who might read that poem, but world is pretty big. And I also like to read Emily Dickinson in relation, and the own relation she builds up in her poems, and that can stretch quite far sometimes.
Well, last year when the Emily Dickinson Museum invited everyone to send postcards to her in answer to this particular poem, I wrote my postcard from the multiverse, which would take in everything, and anyway. So her Emily Dickinson's world, when she was writing, has expanded to the multiverse. That's what I wrote my answer to her.
That's That's pretty heady, Stanley. And in keeping with some of the headier notes of this poem, which I do think actually gets quite, especially at this point here, starts to get kind of hard to follow. It starts to get rather cerebral. And Suzanne, I take your point about the that it's not just simply like a flower child poem or anything by any stretch, of course. But also your reading of the hands and of the countrymen. I mean, I'm completely rethinking my gloss from a second ago about this being something divine, and in fact, it seems to be something about like laboring, like actual physical human labor and toil, and the fact that it's ambiguous is part of what makes this a difficult poem, I think, in many ways. I'm very interested all of a sudden, however, in the word committed. Her message is committed to hands I cannot see. So I wonder, like, what does committed mean here? Like, what is how is that working? Because I mean, there are many meanings of the word committed, and
Could I
also
ask-
archaic ones. Yes.
Could I just add, what I think it's a desperate call, as you see in the photograph, for like Van Gogh, you just want somebody to appreciate their work.
Yeah.
The world, and I want to publish, and nobody understands
Yeah.
what I want to publish. Nobody understands those sunflowers coming off Van Gogh's canvases. And then all of a sudden, she realizes the hand that cannot see, the people who would receive the letter don't understand what she's doing. She's never going to be published. The magazines don't want it. They don't know where to put her, where to categorize her. Because
I think she wasn't interested in getting published.
yeah, she wants to.
Really?
There's
No,
many
Thomas
poems.
Grenfell Higginson, he was one of her editors, and she only allowed a few poems, a few poems to be published.
But they changed everything. They took away the punctuation. They reduced the capital letters to small letters. They didn't know what to do with it.
And there's several poems where she pulls at this. Listen, there's several of them. Listen to me. Somebody listen to me. We just read one at the beginning, I think, of my poem, where she wants to be heard, and she talks about publishers and what you just said. This whole story of people changing everything. The woman does want to be heard. That's why judge tenderly of me. It's the same kind of a line. Take me seriously. Listen to me, or hear me, or I'm a poet.
I had the same idea of the poem when I read it. Like it sounds really frustrated. The first part, even a bit mad, maybe, like that never wrote to me. And then the hands I cannot see, a message committed in the hands I cannot see, judge tenderly of me. It seems to me like the people in the future that will read and will appreciate her work.
Yeah.
Like if you don't appreciate me now, I know this because you never wrote to me, but I will be in the future. And the committed thing, it seems like the message is committed to the better people of the future, something like that.
So if we were to give just a really quick account, or like the most literal account of what we think is being expressed here, so far in these 6 lines of the poem, it would be something along the lines of like, I'm writing a poem, a letter to the world. Nobody really cares about, you know, whatever, but it's not even my poem, it's just nature's poem. I'm just transcribing it. And now I'm committing it, handing it over to hands I cannot see, which means at some point it'll be in the hands of somebody, and I don't know who it is. It's some future hypothetical person, as you're saying, Lee. So that's like a very literal account, I think, right, of what we have here in these first 6 lines. So in that case, a word like committed means like it's just kind of, it's handed to, it's given over to, it's presented to, and so the hands that she cannot see, those are the hands of a hypothetical recipient.
Yes, I agree. But what I would add is that committed has, I think committed has the sense of loyalty that like gets lost when you just translate it with is giving to something, because I think the word committed, it gives the sense of that the person the message is given to cares about it, and it's not just given something that they would like put somewhere in the corner. I don't know, but I think it really is important that she chooses committed here, to show that the hands, that maybe the people that the people that live with her right now may not care about the poem, but maybe people in the future will recognize what a masterpiece this is.
Right, and I think that this extra meaning to committed, to be committed to something means to be dedicated to or loyal to, as you're saying, like to be committed to the cause. And that's when I bring that meaning in, and I don't know if this is almost like retroactive. That's too important. I'm not sure if committed to had the same meaning necessarily for Emily Dickinson, but for us reading the poem, I mean, it's impossible not to get that layer of being loyal to or dedicated to something. And then especially with the preposition to be committed to something makes those two lines read to me as her message is dedicated or loyal to, or in some ways, an intrinsic part of these hands I cannot see. So it becomes something to bring in that meaning starts to change what at least I understand is happening here, the literal account of what's happening, that is of the message being given to these hypothetical hands. And instead the message becomes something about these hands.
It is. So I find that committed to, you passing it on, you hand it over, you kind of continue something that is important. So I think there's in this poem something so important to her that she needs to convey, and that's why it becomes a letter to the world. And for me, one of the key phrases that is also very puzzling is that never wrote to me, and you can, and with 2 dashes, by the way. And you can read it in so many different ways. It never wrote to me, but it might write to me in some ways. You can kind of look into the future. That never wrote to me, as you said it, Mary, it's something, she's anguishing about it, that she's in by herself, and there's probably more possibilities. And I find there's this halting in the poem, where she stops and where she also allows us to put more into it than she says. So we are kind of faced with that dilemma, as I think Mary also said that she cannot talk to people about it because she doesn't have that audience at that point, but she still writes that poem.
Mm.
And I think that's why I find this is a very crucial line for the poem.
To me, it is commitment of nature, the dedication of nature to transmit this message. I would say that the poem is quite reminiscent of Rockwell Emerson and transcendentalism. She becomes a transparent eyeball, as Emerson describes that the poet goes into nature, that he becomes a seer, a sayer, that the poet interprets what is going on. Max, that's what you probably meant when you said it's quite romantic. Wordsworth, he did the same. So she translates nature to us. Nature is created by hands I cannot see. There is a godly figure. God is represented in nature. That's what the transcendentalists meant. Go into nature and find God and come into harmony with nature, and with that also with God. And I think that is what she's saying here. With tender majesty, here we have the sublime and beautiful Edmund Burke speaking. She admires nature as something grand, as something great. And the message, that is the dedication of nature. Nature sends a message. We can find God in nature, and she interprets that for us.
I think that's really interesting, because to me, I think I almost saw it as an opposition between nature and God. Because to me, I think in most other Emily Dickinson poems, when she talks about God, it's almost this, I don't know, like this presence that she does not really trust, and where she kind of highlights that he puts suffering on people, that he's the cause for most of the bad things in the world. And I think with nature, it's basically the opposite, that she mostly highlights what nature gives people, and that it's this great presence. And so to me, it's almost this opposition between there's God in which you believe, and then there's nature. And maybe someday you'll recognize that she's the greater presence.
And nature gets a feminine attribute, whereas God is he. That's an important distinction also to make.
Yes, exactly, because I think it's very obvious in that she capitalizes the H in her, and I think that's a direct opposition between the his and the Bible, for example.
Yeah,
where it's capitalized
that's a really good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. And then in fact, like the sublime or the divine presence in this poem is in fact a female, right? Like there is no like we were talking a little bit about God and creation, and I'm always like prone to see the religious elements in Emily Dickinson, but here in fact, like God doesn't really show up all the way, right? Nature is what's sort of divine and sublime, to kind of go with what you were saying, Mark, a little bit about the transcendentalists and their attitude towards nature, and the way that they solve, or the way that they approach nature as a poetic subject, or as a spiritual or sort of spiritual experience. Yeah, I pasted in the chat real quick because the other version I sent was, since we were talking a second ago about the publication reception history of Emily Dickinson, the version that I sent earlier was the one that had been edited with the commas and the normalized punctuation and everything. But the original version, which is in the forums and which I just pasted in the chat, is the one with the that retains the characteristic Emily Dickinson dashes, which I think are extremely important when it comes to reading the very last lines of the poem. For love of her, sweet countrymen, judge tenderly of me. Because in the sort of, let's say, the normalized version with the commas, it's very clear that it's an address to the sweet countryman at the end. For love of her, comma, sweet, for my love of, judge tenderly of me, sweet countrymen, for my love of nature and her message, right? But with the dashes, it gets like far more complicated, especially with the dash between sweet and countrymen, or the way that the dashes bring out sweet, which is also capitalized. And I don't know, what do we make of the highlighting of sweet here towards the end of the poem? The way that she's really calling her attention to the word sweet, the adjective, this sort of way that she's endearing the countryman to her. It's such an unusual word to call attention to, also, especially in this poem, I think.
I keep looking at this last line, and if you read the first line and the last line, I think that's what she wants. World, judge tenderly of me, and when you call somebody sweet, capitalized, you are maybe she wants to win them over, so somewhere along the line people will judge tenderly of me, because I keep looking at the first and the last line, and that's what I'm hearing of world, I'm writing to you, and when you hear what I have to say, please be kind to me, be kind to me, the poet of 1,000 poems, be kind to me. Sweet people.
That's a plea, isn't it? A plea to
judge.
Yeah, it's a plea.
Oh yeah, and that's maybe where the sweet comes in. Make the plea sweeter, maybe.
That's Shakespearean.
I don't know.
The word judge is something that to judge. Why does she want to be judged? Another question that I have. I mean, why is that word there?
Isn't it Shakespearean? Shakespeare's comedies, they always close with please judge this play tenderly, or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you like the play, where's your applause?
And it's
your hands.
Which is feels different in the context of a play, because play, especially Shakespeare plays like 5 hours long or something. And so when you get to the end, it's kind of like, okay, it was all right. If you liked it, please leave a positive review. Whereas here in this very short poem, it has a very different effect.
But I mean, the lines before, the countryman, we enter the realm of the pastoral, which is also quite Shakespearean.
Mm.
To get back to the capitalization of sweet, for love of her sweet countrymen. The countrymen are those that live in harmony with nature, and also that brings us back to transcendentalism. Live in harmony with nature, come into a communion with nature, and I think this is what's expressed by sweet and the capitalization.
So you're understanding countrymen in a narrower way.
Farmers, people living in the countryside, living in nature, and people who are not city dwellers.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting, because I understand countrymen as my fellow Americans, meaning like to you, sweet country, like all of you, the entire world that I'm writing this letter to. But it's interesting actually to really pause on that, countrymen, and think about country, not just as like the nation, but country as like where as nature, as the natural world. So then that this finally here further complicates at least our initial reading of the poem being, or opposing the world and nature, right? Because like, where do these countrymen belong? Who is she ultimately addressing? Is she addressing the world that is she addressing the world that is in opposition to nature, or is she addressing some part of nature, or some part of the world that's more natural? So my closing question here is, who is she ultimately addressing? Mark, you started to say that she's addressing perhaps people like her, or other. You said the people of the country or something. I guess I'm wondering whether the opposition remains here at the end of the poem, whether she's the agent of nature addressing the sort of unnatural world, or if something starts to collapse here and she's actually addressing like-minded people or allies.
Are you referring to my interpretation of world?
No. The actually Unia's interpretation from world that kicked off the conversation half an hour ago, just of like the worldly world, the world of people, the world of men, versus the natural world, civilization versus nature, or something like that.
I think because she's talking about nature having told her some news, so there's a sense that nature has addressed her, and I would guess that if we understand that, then she probably also has some relationship to countrymen and the people of the actual, like, literal world. So I would say that she's addressing something else that she hasn't had contact with.
So the countrymen are then these hypothetical readers in their invisible hands.
Yeah, I guess that's still an open question, because they're in
No,
there.
it's I think this is what makes this poem very difficult, is it gets hard at the end to figure out who exactly she's addressing. I find I think that it's sort of shifting a little bit, and I'm having trouble figuring out where she's positioning herself in relation to the world and to us, the readers, and where and what community she imagines herself to be in here at the end. The poem.
And actually,
oh yeah, go ahead, Stanley.
Actually, I think she's out, like we mentioned before, a plea. She would like to have an answer. she would like to have someone respond. And when we just spent so much time on sweet, it seems like it might have even been a little bit sarcastic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I totally get the sarcasm. That's I always want to.
God.
Oh, sorry, Jackie, what'd you say?
For love of her. This-
Right.
Yeah.
There's I mean, I always want to go. I want to do the full like, oh, this is Emily Dickinson's like almost like cocky like new poem, right? Which is like, you know, I'm the servant of nature. I just do what I'm told. I do what I feel like doing. And all of you don't get it, and you're never gonna get it. And that's why you've never written me back. That's but I don't know that that's entirely what, what the poem is doing. The poem might have a slightly like softer, sweeter edge ultimately. but I do read sweet as sarcastic, like, and thus this sort of almost Shakespearean plea there at the end to leave a good review as sarcastic, like
Everybody applaud.
Exactly.
I was saying, you know, judge
as
judge
do to me as
me.
I've done to you. Do to me as I have done to you. I was quite polite to you. I said your
I sent you little letters.
readers, and now judge me tenderly.
Right. That's there's almost like, you know, if we can go the full meta route here and you know, bring in some context from the other Emily Dickinson poems. There's almost this show of or demonstration of skill or mastery to be writing a letter to people who can't write them back. Right. There's this, you know, we understand the world never wrote to her. In some ways that can be kind of like tragic and forlorn. She's sort of like an isolated figure that's kind of like biographical reading. But then there's also the, you know, the more Modpovian meta reading, which is like, I write the poem to you, to all of you who don't, you know, who may or may not read them. I don't care. You don't write poems anyway. So what does it matter? I'm the one who's I'm the one who's transcended. I'm the one who's in touch with nature. I'm the invisible eyeball who's transmitting some truth about the world. And you don't get it. You may read it, you may not. It doesn't matter to you whether you do or not.
But it's also in the simple news that nature told. Like it sounds kind of condescending to me. Like it's simple, so.
Right, of course, right, and right. It's simple. It's simple for her because she's the, as Mark said, the transparent eyeball, the invisible eyeball of Emerson. She's become this conduit for truth. In the way that, you know, her countrymen might not be.
Yes, what I would say is that maybe to me, she basically talks about different levels of maybe connection with nature. Maybe there's the world as the society who's not connected at all with nature. And then there are the countrymen who are maybe a little bit more connected. I mean, we won't confuse the speaker with Emily Dickinson herself, but she, I think she lived in the country, I think. So maybe that's an aspect as well. And maybe that other people who might get a little bit more easily than maybe the people who live in the city. But she herself is the one that is connected with nature. Maybe not she alone as an individual, but maybe poets are the ones who are connected with nature. Maybe that's how she meant it. But I think, I think it's really interesting because she has this desire for connection in this poem, when in reality, writing a poem is very isolating. I think that's very interesting.
Right, and the connection is as we've or the possibility for connection in writing a poem as we've explored elsewhere in Mappo, especially with the early poems, is something, is this almost like unrequited writer-reader relationship. That's
Completely.
for some of the poets that we read, it's like an automatically requited thing. Like the Sid Corman poem that we read, it's like you can't. It's almost like you can't escape that. It's like you know, when you read that poem, it's like, oh, okay, you got it. Like, I guess, you know, we've connected now or whatever. But when you read Emily Dickinson, sometimes you're like, oh no, like did we, you know, am I actually your public? Am I actually your audience? Is this something you care about? Is this something that the poem cares about? So it's a kind of different dynamic. I want to make some time for another poem real quick, if everybody's okay.
Yeah.
So we can either do the Ruth Weiss poem, which is very short, or the John Ashbery poem, which is also very short. Not as short. Does anybody have a strong feeling? Should I take a quick straw poll? Is there anybody who feels really like doing the Ruth Weiss poem, or anybody who really feels like doing the John Ashbery poem?
I would prefer the Ashbery poem.
You would prefer the Ashbery poem?
And I'd prefer Ruth Weiss. You've got.
And I don't know either one of them, so.
I can send them along.
I have to go, so I'll get this at another time if it's recorded and you put it up.
Sure, yeah, of
But
course.
it's been great, thanks.
Thanks for
I have
joining
to
us,
go.
Mary. I really I appreciate it. And thanks for the great recommendation of
Yeah, oh,
Emily
it's so
Dickinson.
rich now. I
Yeah.
think I'm
It's
okay.
cool.
See you the
Thank
next time.
Ciao.
Bye, Mary.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Choose.
Bye. What's the name of, okay, what are we doing?
So the Ruth Weiss poem is just called
Poem.
and it's like 4 lines long or something. And then the Ashbery poem is called This Room. So okay, so we currently are divided.
The males are divided or whatever.
Oh no, it's 8 lines. And does anybody else like glanced at these? Does anybody else have a strong feeling? If not,
Oh, I didn't know there was something to glance at.
okay, I had posted it in the forum.
I have to join up that forum, okay.
I think the Ruth Weiss would be really interesting.
What's the name of it?
It's called
It's called Poem.
Poem.
I've got it right here. The animals have come down from the hills to the village because of hunger. The villagers have left for the city because of hunger. The city is deserted.
All right, let's do the Ruth Weiss, and then Mark, next time we'll do an Ashbery poem, since Ashbery is pertinent to the next 4 weeks of the course anyway. So if we feel like meeting again in a couple weeks, which I hope we will, we'll do an Ashbery for sure.
And it's called Poem, the poem?
I just shared it in the chat.
Oh, that's helpful.
Cool. So we'll make this is a cool poem to pair with the Dickinson actually in some ways. So we'll make quick work of it, and yeah, we'll take it from there. It's almost 32:15. I'm in no particular rush, but I also don't. I know people will have Saturdays ahead of them. So, okay, great. I'll read the poem and then we'll just
Wait, I can't get it. Okay.
Did you see it in the chat?
Yeah, I have the link in the chat, but I can't
Here, I can just paste it too in the chat.
But Stanley has already read the poem to us.
Yes, Stanley did read the poem. Here, I just pasted it in the chat.
Okay. Got it.
Right, I just the recording's still running. I'm just gonna do like another little like intro banner thing, because that way it gives Zach and Al and the tech team a place to cut it, and they can put it on the website. I'll just wait for that ambulance to pass. It's like this all the time.
Yeah, I
Well,
know
in the
that,
meantime,
but-
I could say
Yeah.
that I prefer the layout of the poem. I'm not quite sure whether you can see that.
Oh yeah. That's how it's.
So you really have these 3 stanzas, 3 divisions.
That's how it's formatted on the website too. That format didn't carry over when I pasted it in the chat.
Because here's 331.
Okay, here goes. I'm gonna start and then we'll dive into it. Hi everyone, it's Max. I'm in Berlin with the European Time Zone Zoom meetup, and we're going to read the poem, simply called Poem, or perhaps I think it's actually an untitled poem, by Ruth Weiss, which is in Modpo Plus. Here goes, Poem by Ruth Weiss. The animals have come down from the hills to the village because of hunger. The villagers have left for the city because of hunger. The city is deserted. So it's a very short poem. It's broken up on the page into 3 stanzas, or 2 3-line stanzas, and then 1 short line at the very end. The city is deserted. Highly economical poem. This is lumped in with our beat week because Ruth Weiss was a she was a beat essentially, but this isn't as beaty as some of the other beat poems that we've read. I mean, it's not Ginsberg or Kerouac, for example. It's not a maximalist poem. It's very spare, and it's almost haiku-like, which is actually admittedly kind of a beat-like thing. So let's get into it. The animals have come down from the hills to the village because of hunger. What's happening here? I mean, it seems to be very literal and straightforward, right?
Yes, that's the first thing what I thought too. I was like, what am I going to analyze here?
right. Which is interesting, and we can talk about its literalness, or its the fact that it's untitled, or referred to as poem, but like wants to be at least on the level of the word, or on the level of diction, or the line, like rather spare, and maybe resistant to the kind of sort of association generating reading that we do in Modpo. The animals have come down from the hills to the village because of hunger. Because of hunger. Okay, so they've come to the village because they're hungry, and there's not enough food in the hills. Is that I mean, what's the scene here? What can we maybe say a little bit more about what this scene is? Where are these hills? What kind of animals are they? What is this village? Where is this? Does it matter?
I think in the end it doesn't matter, because it could be anywhere, and it applies to almost any village in a country where there's hunger. And I think that's so interesting, because it seems so specific, and it's not at all.
Right.
And who lives in villages? Usually these are farmers. They probably have enough food in storage, and now the animals come and go to their silos and find food.
And start eating the grain that they've saved up. And the animals, it's also unimportant what kind of animal it is, I guess. They're just animals. I mean, is it like coyotes? Is it raccoons? Or I mean, because the kind of animal it is would suggest, or that would determine what kind of food they're looking for, and then maybe what kind of village this is, and then what kind of threat that they pose. If they're if this is a very agricultural scene anyway. I'm sorry, I have a cat knocking on my door. Speaking of animals and hunger, if this is a very agricultural scene, it could be these could be like the sheep, the shepherd's sheep that are in the hills that have come, back looking for the feed or something. Or it could be far more menacing, like it could be like coyotes or something that are coming down and stealing chickens, or it could be like bears if you're in certain parts of the US. It could be bears that are coming down and like eating your pets. I don't know. I don't think that's what bears do. I apologize. I apologize to
Well, the
bears.
Max, the word hunger is more desperate and stressful than just coming down to eat.
Right. You're right. Yeah, because of hunger. Right. There's something driving. There's a driving force.
Well, there's a
And
lack of
when-
food and that we read in this stanza, and that's why they are coming down. And I think that refers to our common understanding that animals, wild animals, come down because they feel like in the village there's food. There might even be human beings to eat and to attack. You know, that's far as it can go. So there might be a threat from the animals from who are coming down, that are coming down from the hills. So that's what I'm detecting in that stanza, and also this notion of there's a tension in it, that fear that also is in that when I read it, a fear of something looming, something dark.
And would you say that fear might be related to the lack of specificity in some ways that's in this poem that we've been talking about, to how
Yeah.
indefinite and determinate it is, about what kinds of animals are coming? It's just the animals, it's the horde, right?
I mean, if we leave the first stanza, we have a progression from animals going to the village, villages going to the city is empty. So there's something that is building up, a tension that is building up already in that first stanza, because we don't know, it's so basically random in some ways. What kind of animals? You ask that question yourself, and I would say wild animals that are hungry, animals that are under this. I think when the tsunami hit, the animals would have this feeling, that sense of danger, and would leave the hills. I think that's something I remember, and that struck me. So there's a feeling of desperation.
So there's this kind of driving energy here that's it's driven in some ways by anxiety or by fear or desperation, or quite simply hunger, right? And so it has there's this kind of dark, brooding, menacing momentum right out the gate in this poem, which brings us then to the second, that gets recapitulated in the second stanza. The villagers have left for the city because of hunger. And the causality is not clear, right? Like we can understand the villagers leaving the city maybe because the animals have eaten all their food, but I don't know that actually happens. And I think that maybe here in the human context, hunger starts to take on a different meaning. Does anybody have any thoughts on this second stanza, or maybe how the pattern of movement or what's driving the villagers differs from what's driving the animals?
It's almost like
at the beginning, you suggested that it has a haiku-like structure. To me, it's more Jewish literature. It's like a psalm. I mean, Ruth Weiss, she was Jewish.
Sure.
And what is typical for psalms is that you have these parallelisms, memprorum, that you have a three-part parallelism. You have the animals have come down. In the next section, you have the villagers have left, which is the first parallel structure. Then from the hills to the village, for the city, in the next section, you have the middle part, and then the final one, because of hunger, that is repeated, also a form of parallelism. I would say she goes back to her own tradition. She writes in a Jewish poetical tradition, and she replaces the animals with the villagers. Maybe she's saying here that also humans are animalistic, like animals.
The psalm structure that's important for sure, especially with the syllogisms that are happening and the parallelisms. Willow, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was going to say that it's almost like reminiscent of a revolution, the French Revolution, something like that. That the villagers have been encouraged, or they've thought that there is something for them in the city, and the city is not usually a place of food manufacture, but maybe they're hungry for justice or something like that. And
Mm.
the city is deserted, so perhaps those that they would go to address have gone into hiding.
Yes, I think it's very interesting that the animals and the villagers, to me, end up in the city because it seems like it's the same reason, it's hunger, but I think it's a different meaning for both of them. I mean, animals, it's probably like hunger in the sense of they are hungry for food. And the villagers, I think it could also be self-realization or something like that that drives them to the city. And when they come there, it's deserted, and both of them, like the animals and the villagers, like don't get to realize their goals.
Oh, speaking of animals.
Isn't it like a kind of an end of the world poem? Because okay, Corona recently, all of the animals came to the city was deserted, nobody has anything to eat, it's the end of the world. When the city is deserted, when the city is the last to go, it's almost like a social hierarchy. Everybody is trying to go someplace quote unquote safe, and it's like there is no place safe, because once the city is gone, it's almost an end of the world kind of a thing.
Right.
It is apocalyptic.
Yeah.
Ruth Weiss with zombies.
Yeah, no, it's
Nothing's left. I mean, it's the end of the world, and it seems like a kind of a beat theme. Maybe if for whether it's, you can't say nuclear because nuclear everything goes at the same time, but you can something, yeah, whatever is going to the thing that's going to end the world politically, socially, or actually physically is there. No?
Mm. And I think that the dot at the end symbolizes that as well, because for the first two stanzas, it was 3 dots every time. And I think that kind of shows this, it's going to continue. And their journey is not ended yet. And now at the end, the city is deserted, and then there's this 1 dot. And I think the journey has finally ended there.
Right, the periods, the full stop. I also see here a development in cultivation. It starts with the animals, it starts with nature, it starts with a biblical beginning. I lift up my eyes to the hills, to the mountains, and then it goes down to a first step in cultivation, namely the village. And then further development is then the city, and also the 3 dots, they also indicate that there is something going on, there is something missing that she left out.
I was going to get back to Jackie, your comment. You said it couldn't have been an atomic bomb, but couldn't it be the occurrence that maybe in the city, the atomic bomb would have had like the most impact? So the animals maybe are okay for a while.
I thought of that.
Villagers.
Yeah, I thought about that. Usually animals know things before we do, like eclipses and things like that. But yeah, to me, an atomic bomb is the whole thing. And when it happens, it's going to happen. But yeah, sure, why, yeah. But it is that you could, if you add another line and then the world is deserted, yeah, it's over. You don't need it. It's something went very wrong.
I totally get the nuclear apocalyptic vibes here at the end, or it's very like zombie apocalypse, I think Willie's.
She may have written this poem right after Nagasaki or Hiroshima, you know.
Yeah, I'm trying to see when she wrote it. I don't have a date.
Yeah.
It was published in 1960, but
it was published in 1960, so she probably wrote that in 1958, 1959.
Yeah, late 50s.
So it is the peak of the Cold War.
Yeah.
Could
But there's
be
also, oh, sorry, Lee, were you gonna say something?
yeah, can it be like like apocalyptic in a way that it's not a disaster, but just something we're doing to ourselves.
Right. I was that's a good point. And that's, I think, a good place to go next. Which is to kind of follow the logic of the poem so far, right? And to say like, okay, so the animals come to the village, and then the villagers leave the village to the city for the city, which means the city dwellers have gone somewhere else, right? And there's this kind of endless, there's this pattern that can repeat infinitely, that in some ways is in Ruth Weiss's mind, there's no point in going beyond here. There's no point in writing the third or fourth or fifth stanza in this kind of ongoing poem. You can just kind of end it there, because you sort of get the point. But she's also, by ending it there, she's also bringing in this apocalyptic element, and thus saying something about how these patterns of behavior, or this sort of drive, this hunger drive, however we want to understand it, whether it's the hunger of wild animals who need to eat, or if it's the hunger of people who are actually, may be physically hungry, but may also be hungering for something like the good life that's promised by modernity, or something, by some sort of social advancement. Maybe these kinds of drives are in some ways our doom. They're sealing our fate. They're dooming us to something that looks very apocalyptic in the context of the Cold War, meaning the deserted city, the city wiped out.
Yeah, I was thinking about the hunger in a different way, because the animals have gone down to the village because of hunger, because the village was hungry, like domesticating animals.
Right.
And then you can also put it in the city part, like the city is hungry, it attracts villagers, like it's attractive and villagers will come there, and it is deserted, so it won't. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but yeah.
So can you just unpack the last part that you were saying a little bit about the?
Yes, because the city, like in this poem, it's not a great place to go. It's deserted. It's maybe isolated or empty, as in lonely, I think. And then, but it also is attractive for people that live in a village. So they will come to the city, and then they will, end up in a place that isn't any better.
Right.
Or is worse. But the hunger is in my interpretation, the hunger is in the city and not in the people.
Right, but it's like a spiritual hunger, or a kind of
No, more like if the city is a thing that will eat people.
Okay. Okay. So the city will swallow you alive, or something.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Like, and
The
the
way that the
animals will come
village,
down to the village, and they will be eaten, because we will eat them.
That's pretty grim.
Yeah.
That's very zombie apocalyptic. I think what's very interesting about this last line is that the city appears to already be deserted. So while the logic of the poem feels like it can be repeated ad infinitum, X goes to Y, Y goes to Z, Z goes to A, chasing the next thing. Here also she's ending it at a point where the villagers get to the city only to find that the city dwellers, they don't even have to chase the city dwellers out, because the city dwellers are already gone. And so that begs the question, where have they gone? Like, where has their hunger driven them to? And is that important?
And maybe that is what the second section is about. The villagers have left for the city. That could mean that the villagers have gone to the city, and now the villages are empty. Or it means that the villagers have left. They aren't anymore in the villages. They've made space for the city dwellers, for the city to move to the villages.
Right, so then that's the sort of loop
Full
or
circle.
sort of cyclical interpretation of the logic of the poem, right? That there's a that then, you know, the people in the city then return to the hills or something, and then they become wild.
I just saw, I very quickly read a fast Wikipedia biography, and it's very interesting. I'm finding that the more I'm working in Modpo, and the more I'm reading, the more I must know about something about the history of these writers. Because what I just read very quickly is she's saying that her and Kerouac were writing in a haiku style thing, back and forth, and then they all went to the desert. And they spent all this time in the desert. So maybe the next one is the city. It's not that they went back to the mountains, but they just split all together to the middle of nowhere but of course I have to read it clearly. I was just looking to see what she was doing, but that makes sense because also the desert is the middle of nowhere, and there also is very hard to find food there, and it's also a whole nother world in the desert. I'm living in one, but it's so important to know when they write and who they're writing to and why they're writing, because then you can start making more sense out of it. Yeah, if they all decided to go to the desert, then the city maybe would be deserted, at least of these kind of people, the poets and the people that had something to say. They said, let's get out of this stupid city.
And I read that same Wikipedia this morning, and they said that Desert Journal is her masterpiece.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything about that, but I'm going to go look it up.
Well,
and then the other one, Mark, what book were you holding that you showed up? What's it called?
Beatitude. Or Beatitude.
Okay, because then she has another collection called Brink, which always means brink of disaster. I mean, it means brink of something. So you start putting words together and things start to, they somehow make associations that you can a little bit understand more of the poem.
So the poem then is in some ways an account of the Beat generation, right? Of the following on what you've the three of you have just been saying.
Don't know.
And it is biblical. I mean, the desert. That's also the place where all the prophets go to.
Of course, yeah.
What's the poet? Isn't a poet like a prophet?
Totally, and especially in the minds of the Beats, where they you know, there's and I think it's very interesting here in this poem how we get this almost little allegory of civilization or something, right? You know, you have the people who are you know, living close to nature in the villages, and also perhaps who are threatened by the wilderness in some ways, who are then, you know, entering the next stage of civilization, who now have a sort of hunger for something that's available in the city, something like a, you know, different quality of life, some kind of advancement. And then now here you have this next stage of civilization, which is the city dwellers have either, you know, they now have a new kind of hunger, a sort of an additional spiritual hunger that can only be satisfied by returning to the wild. And these are the Beats, the ones who are getting back to some sort of like spiritual relationship, maybe with the desert or with the wilderness, where they can kind of prophesize right onto the next.
And to be over the top, the word desert is in the word deserted.
That is not over the top at all. That is perfect.
I'm living here in the high desert of New Mexico, where the sun will be up in about 20 minutes, and my wife and I are going to go out and sit and watch the sun. So I think I'm going to have to.
Yeah, we're now 10 minutes overtime, so we should call it, Stanley. If you want to go watch your sunrise, that sounds awesome. I can also hang around for a couple more minutes if anybody has any like questions or any like final thoughts. But if you have to go at this point, that's totally fine. Please, like, don't hesitate.
Well, what I as a closure, I'd like to say that this was run very much like your discussion groups on Wednesday, you know, with the TAs and Al.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it. One of the things that I like about Modpo is the discussion groups. And So that's one of the reasons I keep hanging out there.
Well, I'm glad you tuned in before the sunrise. It's, that's great. And if you have any recommendations of anything to any historical markers around the Tempelhofer that you can think of from your days in the service,
The 12 stories down with I think the 6th story is the freeway to Zossen-Wunsdorf, you know. So Tempelhof has 12, it's very deep, and we
it's like all
explored
kinds of
most
secret basements or something, right?
Yeah, they do. They have a whole freeway. That's why they developed the Volkswagens.
Wait, what? The freeway goes to where?
What?
Zossen-Wunsdorf, 12 miles out where the headquarters for Hitler were.
And that's actually there?
Oh yeah.
What?
Where?
Well, I mean, you know, when I was there, we explored them all.
Holy cow. Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to pick your brain for those stories someday because I'm actually really interested in the secret tunnels that are apparently everywhere in Berlin.
and Ruth Weiss was at a very early age, her family escaped, you know. And so that kind of affected, I think, a lot of her writing.
I
Anyway.
didn't realize that she was that they were survivors.
Yeah, she was born, well, I think they fled in 39.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, I enjoyed everything today, and I'm gonna
Thanks,
go watch
Dan.
the sunrise. Namaste.
Enjoy it. We should do this again if everybody's okay with that in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I love it because I'm always afraid to. It's helping me because get over fear of thinking what things mean.
I'll send around a doodle poll. I'll post it in the forum.
I would prefer a later time, as I said before.
Sure.
Maybe 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock.
You know, this is perfect for me because, like I say, I get up early in the morning, and so.
But maybe we could do a different day, or we can all check the schedules. I'll send around a poll for maybe something in 2 or 3 weeks or something. While Mappo is still in session, we can do something, and then take it from there, if that's okay.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, nice to hear from you all.
Yeah, this was great. Does anybody have any questions or anything about the course or anything for me as a kind of closing? No.
I'll go back and finish week 5 right now. I'm behind.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone. This was really great.
Thank you.
And this went really well. I'm with Zoom, I'm sometimes like I'm not always super optimistic, even after so many things having happened on Zoom recently. But this was fantastic. Actually, this went super smoothly. Thank you all for participating, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturdays.
And buy a mug to support Kelly.
Thanks, Dan.
Gotta get across that pond. I gotta get across that pond.
I'll post something in the forums, and we'll do this again.
Yes.
In a couple of weeks.
Thanks, darling.
Cool.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.